Privacy and innovation. It's not a choice. It isn't a choice. I have my phone in front of me here, and I was very close to actually reading out some Vogue on poetry, because that's probably about as interesting as it's going to get. But I'm actually going to decline that, because I've just read through it myself, and I thought my intestine nearly climbed up and strangled my brain just looking at it, let alone listening to it. So, GDPR, like Stuart Ed, it's here. GDPR is an ongoing process. It doesn't stop. So what I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to give you an overview of where we are at the ICO. And at the end there'll be time for questions and things like that. And if you wish to ask about certain investigations, by all means do. I can only answer to a certain extent though. But by all means, nothing's off limits. I'll just basically say I can't answer. Okay? So like I say, it's here. It's ongoing, as I'm sure it is. I hope it is for many of you sat in the room. And the ICO is trying to listen. We're trying to respond to the needs of organisations up and down the country. And we're also making sure we listen to citizens. Because at the end of the day, GDPR and Dpia 18 is about citizens' rights. And it is the right of everybody in this room. It's the right of every citizen. And basically the ICO's is to stand there and protect you as a citizen against a company misusing your data. So that's kind of where we are. So how have we done that? We've launched a bunch of targeted resources at small and medium-sized businesses. And we did all that running up to the 25th of May. We had a dedicated helpline, and at one point that helpline was taking 2,500 calls a week about inquiries. They weren't reports, they were inquiries. And we were answering those calls. We've got a whole suite of resources on our website. If you've not looked at the ICO's website, please do. It's got some great guidance on there. Our guide to GDPR is a place to find guidance. And as you would expect, it's authoritative and accurate, because it's us. Don't listen to what other people say. You need to talk to the ICO. Anyone, I've said this once before and I nearly broke Twitter apparently, anyone who tells you they can get you GDPR certified is lying. There is no such thing as GDPR certification yet. So that guide has been accessed several million times now. So it is the place to go and have a look and have a read. And it's constantly being updated. If you downloaded it 3 months ago, go and have a look. It's probably been updated since. All new stuff keeps going in there all the time. We're writing guidance continually. We're about to release guidance on cloud computing. My team's been working on that the last few months. We'll get that out as soon as we can. But that's where our guidance goes. Go and have a read of it. Have a look. You'll find lots of interactive toolkits, checklists, sector-specific frequently asked questions. They're all based on real queries. They're things people have phoned us about. Once we've had that a few times, we sort of think, do you know what? We need to be answering that question. So you'll start to find those on the ICO website as well. We've also begun a series of podcasts. Quite handy if you've ever got to drive somewhere and you're absolutely bored to tears. Have a listen to the podcasts. The latest one is on DPIAs. And I'll come back to DPIAs a bit later. This is really where privacy and innovation, in my opinion, do come together.
Sorry, what does that stand for?
Data Protection Impact Assessments. Like I say, I will come back to those later. So, current state of play. The ICO, made up of committed people who are equipped to meet the challenges and the opportunities that lie ahead. That's what the ICO is. We've actually grown considerably. With GDPR, we're expecting more of everything. We're expecting more breach reports, because the law requires it in high-risk cases. More complaints, because people were better informed of their rights. Interestingly enough, Cambridge Analytica could not have happened at a better time. It really made the world take a sharp look at their rights and their data. So greater engagement as organisations turn to us for advice in these early months and years. The team at the ICO is strengthening, both in number and expertise. We're moving the ICO to a place where we can deliver our new responsibilities and obligations to organisations. As I've said, though, most importantly to the public. GDPR is not the only regulation we oversee. We are also the overseers of the Freedom of Information Act, of NIS, the Network and Information Systems Act, e-privacy, which is currently PECA, will become e-privacy very shortly, and EIDAS, the electronic identification systems. These are all under the ICO's remit. So we cover quite a broad church of regulation. We aren't just GDPR. We are lots of different things. We're currently recruiting a number of senior roles to give us capacity, capability and resilience to tackle the developing regulatory brief. It is expanding. NIS came in place on May the 10th. And for the ICO, that is anybody who is basically a digital service provider. And there is a similar penalty structure to that of GDPR with NIS. So again, it's a growing brief. We've welcomed well over 100 staff from a range of diverse backgrounds and experience in the last 12 months, me included. We have plans for at least another 150 in the next 2 years, taking the ICO staff to well above 600. A few years ago, we were a regulator of a few hundred people at best. Now we are heading closer towards 600 in the next few. As well as roles in our head office, which is over in Wilmslow in Cheshire, if you didn't know where we were, we also have opportunities and offices in London, Belfast, Cardiff and Edinburgh. And again, in each of those offices, there is a dedicated team. So, to give you an idea of what is currently going on, we've got around 200 case officers working on issues raised by the public, 60-strong enforcement department taking forward our investigations, and a similar number charged with developing our information rights policies and engaging with stakeholders and organisations that need to implement them. That's the department I work in, the Policy Directorate. And there's more. We've launched an active secondment programme, which has brought in an influx of new talent. And something I'm very, very proud of is we're kicking off a technology fellowship programme with a 2-year postdoctoral appointment to investigate and research the impact of artificial intelligence on data privacy. That was one of the first things I wanted to do arriving at the ICO, and tomorrow I am sitting down to shortlist for that role. So I'm very, very pleased that we will be designing a framework to audit artificial intelligence and privacy. Our future funding model has also been agreed by Parliament. Contrary to what people think, the fines don't actually come to us. The fines actually go to the Treasury. We are actually funded by a chunk of money from government and from companies registering with us. So under that system, our current budget, or I should say our previous budget of 24 million, is now up to 34 million. So the ICO is now in a very strong financial place to actually move forward and also recruit people and compete with industry. So, I always get asked about this, so I now include it. We will get to the privacy stuff, trust me. Enforcement. People can't talk about the ICO without talking about enforcement nowadays. Everyone see those jackets? They won't let me get near them. I've begged for a jacket. They won't let me have one. So, in the year up to March, the ICO have received a significant increase in data protection complaints. It was up 15% in those 12 months. That's a big jump. Couldn't tell you whether that came in the last quarter once Cambridge Analytica had happened. I'm not quite sure. But in the last 12 months, there's been a 15%. Self-reported breaches are up 30%. Which is a good sign. We want industry to talk to us. And freedom of information complaints are up 5%. Against the increased demand, we closed more cases than ever last year, in the last 12 months, which again is impressive given the workload. We received a huge increase in telephone, live chat, written queries from the public and organisations. With new telephone service for small organisations for the self-reported breaches, in the final quarter, we had 30,000 more calls than in the previous 3 months. A huge jump. And we handled it. I'm well aware that when I do these, people often talk about in the press, certain people said, oh, the ICO isn't prepared for GDPR. I was actually asked it directly on BBC Click. Are you prepared? Yes, we're prepared. Yes, you can see how we're dealing with these complaints. We've also created the Your Data Matters campaign to inform the public about their rights. And that is doing quite well. It's getting through to people. Because like I say, and I will always keep saying it, GDPR is about citizens. It's about the individual. It's not about punishing a company, it's about people. And it's about when harm happens to people through a company not treating their data with the respect it deserves. We've issued the largest number and amount of civil monetary penalties in our history. This has included 26 penalties totaling 3.28 million for breaches of electronic marketing laws relating to nuisance calls, spam text messages, along with 10 enforcement notices and the execution of 3 search warrants. 11 fines totaling 1.29 million for serious security failures under the Data Protection Act 1998. And I must stress that. It's something I've seen when we've announced fines recently, particularly the Facebook one of $500,000. People were, well, I thought you could go and give a 17 million fine or 4%. Well, we can under GDPR, but these offences were committed under the Data Protection Act 1998. So we have to deal with them under the 1998 Act. I think post 25th of May, different issue. Done another 11 further fines to charities, totaling 138,000 for unlawfully processing personal data, and £80,000 fine issued to data brokering organisation as well. A total of 19 criminal prosecuting, resulting in 18 convictions. A further 6 cautions were issued and 11 search warrants were executed. People tend to forget that often our regulatory powers wander into criminal. And I can tell you the Commissioner has no issue with going down a criminal route if necessary. And I think that's the correct thing to do. The misinformation about the massive fines as well. Again, this idea that we just go to default, we just whack the biggest fine or 4%, isn't true. The Commissioner, if nothing else, wants to ensure companies that that's not going to be the default position. We're not going to automatically fine you 4% or 17 million. We hope you know, or will know after tonight at the very least, enforcement is the last resort. The Commissioner has no intention of changing the ICO's proportionate and pragmatic approach. The ICO did this before the 25th of May. We will continue it after the 25th of May. We're not here just to get headlines. We're here to make sure citizens are protected. Saying that, the heftiest fines will be reserved for those organisations that persistently, deliberately, or negligently flout the law. And again, I can assure you the Commissioner has no qualms about using all the tools that we have been given under GDPR, and there are quite a few. Those organisations that self-report, engage with us to resolve issues, and can demonstrate effective accountability can expect this to be a factor when we consider any regulatory action. If you talk to us, we will take it into account. If you try to hide from us, we will take that into account. I know which is the better. Engagement is always better. However, it isn't just about the fines. The fines grabbed all the headlines, but that's not probably some of the best things in the ICO's toolbox, in my opinion anyway. GDPR has handed the ICO a whole new set of tools to motivate organisations towards compliance. Privacy by default and design, something that really sits around what I want to talk about as we go through this evening. Codes of practice are currently being developed. Privacy seals are being developed. We are actually looking at certification as well, so that a company can become GDPR certified under the ICO. Data protection impact assessments. They are very, very useful, and that's something I focus the talk on as we go through this evening. Accountability mechanisms. Data protection officers now become mandatory in certain organisations. So all of these things and more form an integrated package. All of them are necessary. None of them are sufficient on their own. And when we do need to apply a sanction, fines will not be the most appropriate or effective method. We may decide to use other things. We have compulsory data protection audits. We can now pop up at your company and go, we demand to have a look. That's under GDPR, that's the law. We can, if we want to, give warnings, reprimands, enforcement notices. All of these are important enforcement tools, but the one I consider the most important one, the ICO can stop your organisation processing data. Forget a 4% fine, we can tell you to stop. How crippling would that be for an organisation? It's a big one. None of those will require an organisation to write a cheque to the Treasury, but they will have a significant impact on reputation and ultimately their bottom line. Anyone who thinks it won't, ring Mark Zuckerberg. Ask him how his shares are doing. 17 billion were wiped off his personal shares because less people are now signing up to Facebook in the last quarter. That has done huge damage to him personally, to the company, all because we're investigating. That is a huge damage to reputation. How many small companies could withstand that kind of reputation? So, my boss, the Commissioner, she can't mention enforcement without mentioning a few more of her favourite E-words. And her favourite E-words are engagement, education, and encouragement, to name a few. Hence the reason why she makes sure people like me come out and talk, so we can talk to you. That, like I said, you get it from the horse's mouth, not the other end. That's what we're there for. We've always preferred the carrot to the stick. We don't want to punish organisations for breaching the law. The Commissioner wants to help stop that happening in the first place. And I can assure you, I've sat down with Elizabeth Denham many times, and she is very much of the position that she does not want to fine companies. She wants them to obey the law. She wants them to engage with us if necessary. So the public. The ICO believes the public should be and is at the heart of everything we do. These are citizens' rights. They are public rights. They are your rights. There have been cases, I can't remember which police force it is now, so I won't say, but they left a disc out containing a rape victim's details. It got stolen. They were fined quite heavily by us. I think it was over 130,000. A university got fined by us because a database that they created many years ago got left up. Through a vulnerability, it then got hacked and the information got leaked. It actually contained information about student disabilities, extenuating circumstances. That's not acceptable. If it was you, how would you feel? The fact that a future potential employer could Google you and find out you didn't want to submit an assignment because you were suffering from depression. That's not acceptable. This is why we're conducting this investigation into data analytics for political purposes. Because it's important that the public is fully aware of how information is used and shared in modern political campaigns and the potential impact on their privacy. GDPR has people at its centre. It gives people new and strengthens rights, gives people choices about how their data is used, shared and stored. And again, I say, thankfully to Cambridge Analytica, the public are far more aware than ever of what their rights are, or at least they now know they have rights. And they're more than happy to talk to us if they feel they've been breached. So, we've been rightly concentrating on ensuring organisations are prepared, but we've never forgotten the public. They are at the heart of what we do. So what's next? We're a few months in, like Stu said. Sky hasn't fallen in. We haven't had Y2K. We're here. Everyone's happy still. It's good. Honest. We're in this new era of data protection. Does it feel like there's a light at the end of the tunnel? Or as the old joke goes, just somebody bringing more work? Yeah. I know which one I feel it is. For those of you who still feel there's work to be done, I actually congratulate you. There is. It's ongoing. It's not going to end. This is not Y2K. This is not get to January the 1st and go, phew, systems didn't fall over. I'm old enough to remember it. I worked Y2K. This is not it. This is now how we are from here on. Get used to it. Odds on it's not going to change for another 20 odd years. That's how long it took us to change the last one. We're here, we feel it has the tools to deal with technology, and we think it's good. GDPR is good. It's good for business as well. So it is ongoing. So it's really important companies understand it's not about a deadline. This is not about getting past the 25th of May. This is about how we move forward and how we continue in this new age of data protection and how you ensure your organisations are respecting the rights of individuals. Like I say, and that's what it's all about, the rights of individuals. I'm sure many of you had bosses, clients, patting you on the back, buying you a drink, giving you a bunch of flowers on the 25th. Maybe, maybe not. The point is, on the 26th, nothing had changed. We're now in this new era. Now is the time that whatever you did to put your foot on the gas to get you to the 25th, you can't take your foot off the gas now. It's going to have to be constant from here on in. And that's why it's good for business. You can't relax anymore. So for those of you who did get involved heavily in getting organisations ready for GDPR, getting your company ready for GDPR, whatever it may be, you've just got to keep doing that wonderful hard work that you did, because it can't let up. We can't let the public down. This is their rights. We need to honour them. We need to let them know we respect their data. We respect their rights. And I truly believe that companies who do that will benefit. Say, Facebook is starting to see the negative side of it. If you're a company who can put on its website, show you are responsible, push yourselves as being the responsible company, it will bring you benefits. Because people now are looking for companies who respect their data rights, who aren't going to sell on their contact details to some shady PPI salesman or Windows salesman. They want companies that are going to respect their data and tell them up front what they're going to do with it and how they're going to do it, and if it is going to be shared, who they're going to share it with. And they're going to tell them that outright. And that, to me, is where privacy and innovation start to combine. So IT security and GDPR, you can't get away from them. It ties so closely, and cybersecurity is so heavily intertwined with GDPR, it's incredible. I haven't done it tonight, but I've actually before now used a CIA triad to actually show people how it links so closely in with certain data laws. And it is so intertwined, it's incredible. So as we get more legislation, as there's more pressure from internal and external IT consumers for 24/7 access to the latest technology, whilst maintaining the integrity, confidentiality and availability of the information that's essential to us. It's essential to your customers if you supply. It's essential internally to your staff, because that's how business works. We can now have virtual offices anywhere, but can you secure it? Can you make sure that there isn't going to be an accidental data breach because somebody was sat in McDonald's on the Wi-Fi and they'd sent an email with an attached spreadsheet that wasn't encrypted, that contained information that should never get into the public realm? You have to make sure you can cover those things. You have to educate your staff. You have to educate yourself. You have to be aware at all times. IT risk, if you look at IT assurance, really sits very well with GDPR. It sits very much hand in hand. This idea that if we try to look at risk mitigation, GDPR is risk driven. It's about the harm that can actually come from what remains. We don't expect you to mitigate the risk completely. We understand that. But what we do expect you to try to do is mitigate as much of it as possible. And it all comes down to IT assurance. It's that stuff that I'm sure many people in the room have banged on about their entire working lives. Go back 10 years, 15 years, we were probably in the minority. When we were talking about business as usual, business continuity and disaster recovery, we were being looked at very strangely by the board, weren't we? They were sitting there going, really? You want how much to have a spare server? You want this, yeah? Now all of a sudden that boardroom is sitting there going, how much do you need? And that's why it's been good for privacy and good for innovation. I was at the coalface, and I put myself as that. Stu very kindly introduced saying that I've worked all over the place, and I have. Being at that coalface makes you understand how easy it is. Any slip and sensitive data can escape. It can be breached. It can be lost control of. That's something very important to remember about using the term breach. Breach is not about something in the public domain. It's about something you've lost control of. That includes if you encrypt it and lose the keys. That's a breach because you no longer have control. And it's about controlling the data and lowering the risk. So it fits very much with IT assurance. So all of those in the room who, like I say, over the years, like me, have been standing at these types of things or standing in boardrooms and banging away about how we must make sure IT assurance is a central part of our business, we've now been vindicated. And that's the important thing. It's about that risk management. It's about mitigating the risks. And GDPR forces that. It is about risk. It's not about don't do. It is about limit the risk and actually do something that's correct for people. And as I say, a risk-based approach is a good place to start with GDPR anyway. So if you are still working on it and you're still thinking about it, take it from a risk point of view. What happens when you've mitigated as much risk as possible? Is the residual risk acceptable? Only you can answer that because it's your company or your business you work in. It's your data. You understand it far better than we do. And it's about being able to understand what that risk is. And again, it comes back to those people I've known all my career and I've so fondly worked with, who've always gone on about looking at the risk. Like I say, it's sad to say, during the 90s, so many boards sat there and used to sort of, snigger, laugh, yeah, put the report to one side and pay no attention. They were right all along that we must look at IT assurance, IT risk. Can we recover from a disaster? If there is a disaster, how do we keep the business going to protect people's data? All of those things those people bleated on for years is now core. It's the heart of GDPR. So, for many years, the ICO have championed the benefits of what is called privacy impact assessments. We did a lot of this for new, innovative, but potentially high-risk types of processing under Dpia 98. And they were voluntary. There was no legal framework to tell you to do these. They were purely voluntary. Under GDPR, as of the 25th of May, this now formalises the situation by making the use of what is called data protection impact assessments, DPIAs, a legal requirement in certain circumstances. Legal. Failure to do so means you are breaking the law, which means that, very sadly, you will meet my colleague, Steve Eckelsley, who is the Director of Enforcement at the ICO. And he's a grumpy Mancunian. Well, actually, he's a Lancastrian more than, yeah. I digress. So, this is not about red tape. This is not about doing something that's unnecessary and just an extra burden on your company. This is about bringing something in that will be extremely useful. It's a useful tool to use when commencing any project. Anything you do that involves personal data, you should actually look at a DPIA. Now, only under certain circumstances is it a requirement. However, I would always suggest you do them regardless, because starting it at the outset, you will have an idea of how much risk and harm there actually is. It can also save you a lot of time, because if you do it at the outset, you might save yourself weeks later on. If you're designing a piece of software, a few weeks in, you suddenly realize you need to embed security into it. You might have to throw an awful lot of code away. You might have to go backwards. If you do it at the start and think about privacy by design and by default, you can actually start improving your system, how you design. It's this legal requirement. It can be very, very beneficial regardless. If you actually do DPIAs that aren't a legal requirement, should you have a breach, these are the documents we'd like to see. If you can show us your DPIAs and show that you took as much care as possible to mitigate the risks, we will take this into account with any regulatory action that may have to be taken. So in other words, if you have a breach, show us your DPIAs, show us your documentation, and we will go, okay, you couldn't have seen this, we understand. And that will be taken into account for any form of regulatory action. All of this, these concepts of DPIAs, they sit at the heart of GDPR, privacy by design and by default. Innovation and privacy working together, and not an or. It can never be or. You really want to drive your business forward, you want to be innovative. You really want to make sure your company is the one customers go to, privacy. Do both. Okay, if you're respecting people's privacy, that's great. But we all know business wants to innovate. And the ICO are not afraid of innovators. We want you to push forward. That could even involve playing in the sand with us, and I'll explain that at the end. So what is a DPIA? It's a documenting process. It's this idea that it'll allow an organization to systematically describe and analyze its intended processing of personal information, helping them identify and minimize data protection risk at an early stage. That's the whole point of it. You look at it, you run through a process. I think there's a template on the ICO's website. Run through it, identify your risks, mitigate it where you can. Decide at the end whether you've mitigated it enough or whether you have to go back and try something else. As well as being a key element of a controller's accountability, an effective DPI could have real benefits down the line, ensuring compliance. You can show us these things. It builds external trust, avoiding the possibility of reputational and financial damage. If you do DPIAs, anonymize them by all means, but publish them. If you've got a website, stick them on your website. Make people wave it from the rooftops going, look, we take your data responsibly. Show people that you understand that this is their rights and you are going that extra mile to protect them. So where it's required legally is where a DPIA processing is likely to result in high risk to the rights and freedoms of natural persons. And that is the terminology from GDPR. It's also the terminology from the DPA 18. Likely. Likely does not mean the risk is certain. But it is the responsibility of the controller to assess the level of risk of the intended processing by making a reasoned judgment at the likelihood and potential severity of harm. That's what you need to consider. Potential severity of harm. Our guidance includes examples highlighted in the GDPR and also further lists that the ICO is legally required to develop of the types of processing likely to be high risk. So if you go to the website, you'll actually see types of things we consider to be high risk, worth looking at. So our draft DPI guidance builds on our previous PIA code and with further detail on specific GDPR requirements. So it's there for you to use. Go and look at it. It's free. We don't charge for this stuff. It also gives detail on the circumstances when controllers will be required to consult the ICO prior to processing. That is a legal requirement. If you get to the point of where you can't mitigate the risk, you either abandon it or you consult us. That is the law. You must talk to us. We are required under that law to give you written advice within 8 weeks. So if you submit your DPIA because you cannot mitigate the risk, you must submit it to us and we must reply back to you within 8 weeks. We have the right to extend that by another 6 if it is particularly complicated. We obviously understand with technology, nothing is ever straightforward. That's part of my department's responsibility. When those DPIAs come in, my department, we sit down and we look at the technology being used. And we try to fathom out how best to help you mitigate the risk. So, as well as offering advice and that guidance, we could in some circumstances issue a formal warning to an organisation or even take formal action to ban the processing altogether. So if we decide that it cannot be mitigated and it is far too risky, we will tell you so. That's not us going, oh, don't think you should do this. No, it will be us telling you, you can't do this. That's the end of it. You can't. So we've published detailed guidance on the areas of legitimate interest as a basis for processing under GDPR as well. It's quite an important thing. The areas of where you choose to decide what your legitimate reason for processing is, find those. Just going off on a tangent, consent, by the way, is the weakest of them all, because consent can be revoked at any time, which is, something you then have to deal with. Whereas if you can identify one of the other legal bases, far better. I think, talked to Stuart earlier, public interest is probably something the BCS could likely look at for these talks and recording them. The fact that public interest is, the BCS is there to promote technology, promote it for use of citizens. The fact that this is being recorded, for me, suits their legitimate interests. It's part of public interest or legitimate interest, whichever one. But that's just me giving advice down the camera to Stu. So, DPIAs. You must consult us. It's all in GDPR. This is the heart of GDPR about the innovation and the privacy parts. If you're being innovative and you can't mitigate the risk, you must talk to us. You must come to the ICO. We will try and help. We're not the big bad wolf. We want companies in the UK to be innovative. It's why I come out to things like this, is to talk to people. So it's a key element of the new focus on accountability and data protection by design, and a more risk-based approach to compliance. Excuse me. If you have been doing privacy impact assessments, you just need to update them. If nothing significant has changed, you don't need to worry too much. If there's been a significant change, you need to do it again. A DPIA isn't a one-off. It's something you may want to revisit and keep refreshing and keep updating over a number of years while a particular project is live. Not just in its development life cycle, but once it's in place, once it's actually being used. Go back, refresh it, rechange things. So, you need to review what you've got, and if you haven't, I would advise you to do some DPIAs. Have a look at your current processes. Even if you're not legally required to do it, I would suggest you do them. Do them because they can be very good if you have a breach. It shows us you were thinking at the time about privacy. That's something very important. So, a DPIA, what must it include? Excuse the shocking pink, it's not my idea, it's the ICO's design. So describe the processing and your purposes. Assess necessity and proportionality. Identify and assess risks to individuals, and identify any measures to mitigate those risks and protect the data. That's what must be inside your DPIA. It's a documented process of that there. And if you can produce those in the event of a breach and show they were written at the time, that's what we want to know. We will take these into account. It does not have to eradicate the risk. This is not about zero risk. This is about risk mitigation. Getting it down to the best you possibly can without leaving anything that can cause major harm. So you must do a DPI for processing that is likely to be high risk, but an effective DPIA can also bring broader compliance. Financial, and again, reputational benefits, helping you demonstrate accountability and more generally, building trust and engagement with individuals. If you show individuals how you run an organisation, how your company operates through DPIAs, they'll start to trust you. 17 billion, that's Mark Zuckerberg. It's important to have people's trust. We're a much more savvy society than people think. We understand our data. We understand the value of our data as well. So a DPIA may cover a single processing operation or a group of similar processing operations, and you can even have a group of controllers do a joint DPIA if it's similar enough. So it's not an onerous task that should be on a person. It should be throughout an organisation or through a group of controllers. So they're not meant to be horrible tasks. They're meant to help you. They're meant to help your innovation be inclusive of privacy, to understand that early on. It's important to embed DPIAs into your organisational processes and ensure the outcome can influence your plans. There's no point in drawing one up if you just totally ignore it, thinking that's all right, I can shove that in front of the ICO if they come calling. It must influence the plans. It's got to be part of it. So it's not a one-off exercise, like I say, you must keep it under review. Keep going back to it, keep reviewing it. There are broader risks, rights, freedoms to individuals that you must cover when doing DPIAs. The whole point is to make sure you understand the risk and the harm you can cause. And that's really just understanding your data. And if you understand your data, you actually become a more effective organisation as well. So to assess the level of risk, a DPI must consider both the likelihood and the severity of the impact. It should be risk-based, and it should be specific nature, scope, context, and purposes of the processing. So, you must do a DPI before you begin any type of processing which is likely to result in high risk. This means that although the actual level of risk has not yet been assessed, you need to screen for factors which point to the potential for a widespread or serious impact on individuals. In particular, GDPR says in your DPIA, if you plan to, use systematic and extensive profiling with significant effects. And that is any form of profiling. That includes artificial intelligence as well. And there are actually specific things about automated systems in GDPR. Process special category or criminal offence data on a large scale. So again, under GDPR, special category data has changed slightly as well. There's been new categories added. I think genetic is one of the new ones from memory. You need to check. Systematically monitor public accessible places on a large scale. So we also require you to do a DPI plan if you, sorry about the font size, there's a lot of these to go through, use new technologies. An example I give is artificial intelligence. If you're doing anything with artificial intelligence, machine learning, you really should be doing a DPIA on it. Chances are you'll probably need to talk to us at some point. This is one of the reasons why I've pulled this AI fellowship in, because I think it's very important. Use profiling or special category data to decide on access to services. So if you are deciding on either the special category of one of the data types we have, or if you're profiling, then you have to do a DPIA by law. Profile individuals on a large scale, process biometric data, process genetic data, match data or combine data sets from different sources. It's a very dodgy one to do that one because it potentially could start to re-identify if you're using pseudo-anonymized data. And that's a dangerous one. Collect personal data from a source other than the individual without providing them with a privacy notice. This is called invisible processing. Again, it's about knowing who you're buying data lists from if you do that. Make sure they are reputable, make sure they can show you that they have full consent and legitimate reasons for having that data and being able to sell it on to you. Track individuals' location or behaviour, profile children or target services at them, or process data that might endanger the individual's physical health or safety in the event of a security breach. You should think carefully about doing a DPIA for any other processing which is large scale, involves profiling, monitoring, decides on access to services, opportunities. You really need at that point in time to be doing DPIAs. And the earlier you do them, the better. Because you may get to the point and go, do you know what? There's actually no personal data in this project, and scrap it. You've not lost anything. It's much worse to get halfway through a project and go, nah, damn, all this is identifiable personal data. I need to start a DPIA now. It's a bit late at that point, and then you've got to scramble backwards. It wastes time for your business. That is a pointless thing to try and do. Start with a DPIA. It's a good place to start. So even if there is no specific indication of likely high risk, good practice to do DPIA for any major new project involving the use of personal data. Do it at the outset. It's all better for you. Should begin early on, like I've said. Do it as soon as you can, before you start your processing, and run along the planning and development process. It'll actually help write the DPIA, and the DPIA will help you design. The two work together. They are very, very good. I've met an awful lot of companies over the last few months who do these now, and they have actually stated the benefits of doing it. For the sake of doing what looks like an extra piece of paperwork, actually improves your project, your innovation, shows you are respectful of privacy. So, you must seek the advice of a data protection officer, if you've got one. You should also consult with individuals and other stakeholders throughout the process, and the process is designed to be flexible and scalable. And we recommend you publish your DPIAs, obviously with sensitive information removed. That's on the ICO's website, which just takes you through a cycle. And it's just a very useful place to start. You know, I appreciate that. Sitting there and staring at a blank piece of paper and sorting out a DPIA is probably not an easy process. But go and look at the resources we have. Talk to other companies you know and go, have you done DPIAs? Where did you start? There's nothing wrong with that conversation. Have that conversation. It's important. So do you need to consult the ICO? Well, as I've said, if it identifies a high risk and you cannot take many measures to reduce that risk, you must talk to us. That's a legal requirement. You must submit your DPIA showing the risk that is left. The residual risk must be shown to us. We will then get back to you and tell you whether or not this is acceptable. Which, to be honest, is a far better position to be in than not submit it to us. Go ahead, use personal data, we find out about it, and we come and deal with you. Because that's not good. So, when you come to do it, there is a form online for you to complete and submit a copy of your DPIA. That will actually go into our DPIA team, who will then assemble a group of people they need. That may include my team, if it's around a particular technology, or it could be around our general policy team if it's looking at general areas of policy that risk needs to be mitigated. So once we have the information we need, we will generally respond within 8 weeks. The information we need. The clock does not start ticking, by the way, when you click submit. The clock starts ticking when we go, yes, we've got everything, we will now start reviewing. And we will get back to you on that. So, and as I've said, we can extend that by a further 6 weeks in complex cases. Out of that system, we will provide you with a written response. So from that written response, you will have very clearly what you need to do, what the outcome of this is. There is the age-old question, what happens if you can't mitigate the risk? Like I said earlier, could take the view of, okay, stop it, don't do it. I also mentioned earlier playing in the sand. And we are currently setting up and investigating a regulatory sandbox. And the idea being is if you're so innovative and the risk is so high, but the benefits are huge, talk to us and we are going to set up a regulatory sandbox. You will be able to come into the ICO and work alongside our policy, our technology people, and we will actually explore that with you. Very similar to how the FCA currently do theirs. So we are currently discussing and setting this up. We will be going to consultation later this year. If you're interested, keep an eye on the ICO's website. And that is an avenue that organisations are going to be able to explore how to do real cutting-edge innovation. Say, AI, for example. So, I've covered an awful lot. I've thrown an awful lot at you. It's a very warm room, and much of this is about as digestible as Vogue on poetry. But I would like to say thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much to Stu and Co for inviting me. And do we have any questions?